Welcome back. Our milled lumber has been resting for a couple of days. Now it's time to resaw it, replane it, glue it edge to edge, and get ready to make those raised panels for our doors. We also need to get the router table set up for our cope and stick joints, so let's get going. Before we start resawing, just a quick note here on safety. You need to make yourself one of these or something like it. What this is, it kind of looks like a little pitchfork or maybe even a wooden tuning fork. But what it is really is just sized for the two sizes of lumber that I typically resaw, either 1 inch thick or 2 inches thick. And then there's a recess back here for the blade to go after you push the board through. So you push it in this way, and when you get to the end of the cut, the blade will go into this area here and your board will be past the blade and clear. It's a real safety thing instead of pushing it with your hand, which could slip and you could go into the blade. So either use a push stick or make something like this, and it'll be a lot safer and a lot more comfortable. All right, we're ready to resaw. I've struck a line down the middle of the edge of the board. I've got my planed edge down so it's smoother. And of late, I've been using this mag switch resaw guide setup, and I like it a lot. It's got ball bearings here, and the board rolls against those ball bearings, and it makes it really easy to track the board through the cut. Well, let's get going. And there we go. All right, after resawing the boards, a good practice is to put the book matches back together. Sawn sides to the inside, put them back into registration, and stack them back up and let them rest for just a little bit. Now, we're not talking a few days here. We're talking a few minutes, maybe half an hour to an hour, cup of coffee, maybe lunch. Let them rest just a little bit, then we'll come back and we will plane this side perfectly flat, and our boards will be ready to go. All right, a couple of little tips here before we start planing. First off, you should mark an edge with some marks that you'll remember so that the marks are crossing both edges of the wood so you can get the book matches put back together easily. Also, just put a mark on the previously planed edge. Right now it's pretty easy to tell which side was resawn, but after it goes through the planer a couple of times, it won't be quite so easy. Another little hint too is when you're milling dark lumber like this, be sure to wear light colored clothes so all the dirt really shows. I guess if I was doing maple, I should be wearing like a really dark shirt. All right. Now I've got the planer set for the lightest possible cut. It may not even make contact the first time through, but let's get going. Okay, all the boards now are planed. They're a little over thick, actually 1/128ths of an inch over thick, but that's okay because they'll still need to be sanded after we glue the book match pairs together. Now's my favorite part. This is the time when you actually get to have some fun, be really creative. Now, you'll remember that I've already calculated the exact finish sizes of the panels I need. According to my spreadsheet calculations, I need 4 panels that measure 10 and 13/32 wide by 9 and 26/32 high, and 2 panels that are 8 1/8 wide by 19 1/2 high. To help me figure out from where I want to cut the parts for those panels, I cut out the 2 sizes of doors from some poster board. Well, actually, I made these about a 1/4 inch oversized in each direction. That's because I'm using chalk to mark out my book match pair choices, and chalk makes a pretty wide mark. I've got the book matched pairs of wood laid out, matched up, and now I can just lay these templates on top and move them around until I get an idea of where I want to cut the parts out to get the best looking book matches. So let's start looking around. Just a couple of hints here on the templates. Like in this instance, this one is actually wider than it is tall. So I marked an arrow showing that this is actually the orientation of the door, just to remind me. And on both of these templates, I marked dead center, top and bottom, so that I could line those little arrows up on the joint in the boards and make sure I get everything equal on either side. So I move these around and look and get an idea of what's going to look like. And that's boring. I really like this up here. I looked at this before. It's a beautiful book match pair. Unfortunately, I need 2 doors this size, and there's nothing on any of these other boards that really pairs up and looks nice with that. So unfortunately, I think I'm going to have to use that someplace else. Now, I looked down here at this, and I thought this was actually pretty nice. It's got these 2 oval shapes here, and it's just pretty. It just looks nice. But I couldn't find anything else that really matched that well. Once again, nothing really sort of flowed with that. That was close, but not quite there. I love this, but these 2 knots here really scare me. And that looks pretty good, but I don't know what I'd match that up with. So as I continued to look around, I started turning the boards, the pairs, end for end, and what I found was that actually, if I was to kind of cut this right along here, I've got this nice sort of waterfall flow. And then if I go just below these knots over here, I've got the same kind of water flow coming down here, and it's really interesting and really attractive. So I'm going to get just below those knots, and I'm going to start marking out for one of the 2 larger doors. All right, we've got our locations for the panels for the doors marked out, and what I'm doing now is I've carefully lined up the joint to make sure the book match is just perfect, and I'm just throwing a clamp on there to hold it in place. Then in the field of where the panel is, I'm putting a tick mark across so that I'll be able to line this book match up perfectly after it's cut out. I'm also making a cut mark down here to where I'll cut this on the miter saw. I'll cut this to length, and then we'll be ready to final joint this and glue this together. We're going to joint this with a jointer plane, a hand plane. I'm going to show you a trick on that, and then we'll be ready to glue these panels up. All right, now our book matched pairs are sawn pretty much to length, and I've put them back together with the previously jointed edges. And all I'm going to do now is I'm going to trim off the opposite edge. Now this edge was never jointed, and it's probably not entirely parallel to the jointed edge. And I just want to get that straight, smooth, and parallel to this edge so that I'm not fighting with the clamps when I glue up these pairs, these panels. All right, a hand-planed edge will make a really nice joint. In fact, it'll make the glue line, for all intents and purposes, invisible if done correctly. But the challenge is, how do you plane this edge perfectly square? The problem is with your hand plane, even a little more pressure on the right or a little more pressure on the left, or if your blade is ever so slightly out of line, you could plane in a slight angle. To eliminate that possibility, take your pair and fold it just like that. And watch this little demo and you'll see what this will do for you. You'll notice that even though exaggerated, there's quite an angle planed into those two edges. When you fold the boards out flat, it makes a perfect joint. So I've got a couple of boards here from one of my pairs, and all I got to do is just plane that edge. And as soon as I get two continuous ribbons, boom, we're done. And now we're going to have a perfectly jointed edge. All right, now what I've done here is I've cut 3 different size domino slots. And it's really just to demonstrate how the domino machine makes mortises to fit these loose tenons. You can see that this slot is a nice tight fit. This slot leaves some room to either side so the domino can move back and forth. And this one leaves a really big slot here. Now what I'm going to do when I cut the dominoes for our panels is I'm going to cut the small slot on one side and the medium-sized slot on the other side so that when I put the panels together, I'll be able to slide them a little bit and get my book matches lined up just perfect. The domino machine, one of the great things about it is that it will place these mortises the same exact distance from the reference edge. Now this isn't really in the center, but that's okay because the distance is the same. And then when I glue up my panels, that will put my surfaces exactly aligned. And that's what the dominoes are going to do in this situation, is simply help align the panels. Now on each of these panel pieces, I've made marks where I'm going to put the domino mortises. And I'm going to do them all from the top side, and I'll put them in these lines. These lines were made across with the book matches matched up perfectly. I'll put the small side on the right-hand side on every one, and the medium size slot on the left-hand side on every one, so that I can keep it all straight. All right, I've got the fence on my saw stop moved over and set on top of the table here just to provide a backstop to keep this board from moving. I've got my marks here. I'm cutting the small mortises because this is the right-hand side of the panel, and we're ready to go. And there we go. Very nice. All right, all the right-hand side pieces are cut. Now I'm going to start to cut the left-hand side pieces, and I want to switch the domino over to the medium size. And you want to do this with the machine running. There we go. And there are our medium width mortises ready to go. Isn't this amazing? And not a speck of dust anywhere. Great machine, this Festool domino. This panel's ready to glue up. All right, now this glue up is really super easy. Just gonna spread some glue on here. I'm not even worried about the domino mortise slots that much. Some's going to get in there just from spreading the glue around. I'll probably be a little sloppy with this, but that's okay. We'll get that glue off the surface with no problem. Now, what I want to do is knock these in. And on these tight mortises, it's a little bit more difficult. Dead blow hammer comes in really handy to get these in. Now the other side with the wider mortise, they'll go in pretty easy. And you can see as I'm spreading the glue, a little bit is going down into those mortise slots. Don't really need to fill those up. We're not doing a structural thing here. What we're doing is purely an alignment thing. All right, and I want to make sure that my registration marks, there we go, perfectly lined up. And all we got to do is just put a little clamp pressure on it. Get a nice little even bead of squeeze out. And the best thing to do with this squeeze out is to get rid of it after this kind of gets rubbery. So I'm going to put a couple clamps here on the top, not touching the wood, just to make sure I get even clamping pressure. A little bit more squeeze out there. And there we go. Now, in about 15 minutes, that glue will be skimmed over and kind of rubbery. And at that point, I'll just take an old chisel or a scraper and scrape that off, and then we'll just have minimal sanding to do to get that cleaned up. And that's all set. With the door panels being glued up and sitting in the clamps, it's time to turn to the actual door rails and stiles. Now, we're going to make these out of maple, and we're going to use this Freud router bit set. The set includes the rail coping cutter, the sticking cutter, and the panel raising bit. In order to get set up, we need our rail and stile stock cut to the exact length, and we need a few scrap pieces for dialing in our setup. So how do we determine the length of the pieces for our rails and stiles? Well, let's take a look. The first thing that we need to do is to measure the opening in the cabinet where the doors are going to be installed. Now, that's a simple matter of measuring the width and the height. Now, you want to take those measurements in a couple of places to make sure that the opening is square and consistent. Next, determine how big you want to make the doors. Now, for this project, I want a 1/2 inch overlay over the face frame. Now, if I was going to make this one big door to cover the entire opening, I could just simply add 1 inch to the height and 1 inch to the width and be done. But I want this to be 2 doors. So here's how to do it. First, take the opening width and halve it. In this case, my opening width is 22 inches, so half of that is 11 inches for one door. Now add a 1/2 inch to that for the overlay on one side. Now we have 11.5 inches. But we need to leave a tiny little space in the middle between the doors, so I subtract 1/16 of an inch. Now my door width for each door is 11 7/16. Later when I install the doors, if I need to close up that gap a little bit or increase it a little bit, there's a tiny bit of adjustment in the hinges to allow for that. Of course, the door height, I just add an inch to the opening. 21 3/4 plus an inch equals 22 3/4. So with those dimensions, how long do we cut our rails and stiles, and how big do we make the raised panel? Well, for that, we go to the door configurator. The first step is to enter in the width of the rails and stiles you want to use. In my case, I'm going to make 2-inch wide rails and stiles, so I enter that here. The Freud router bit set makes a 13/32 stub tenon on the end of the rails. That information's on the specification sheet for the router bit set. So I enter in that dimension here. Then I enter in my door opening width and my door opening height. And next I enter in how many doors I want to have covering that opening. Then I enter in the width I want to make each door, and I enter in the height. The spreadsheet calculates the rail length automatically. The stile length is the same as the door height, but it too is entered automatically on the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet tells me how many to make of each part, and then the spreadsheet enters in the width and the height of the door panels and tells me to make 2 of those. If you'd like a free copy of the door configurator spreadsheet, go to my website or click on the link in the description box below. Well, that's about all the time we have for today. So I'm going to wrap this up. I'll finish gluing up the door panels, and in the next video, we'll start cutting the joinery and putting the doors together. I'm looking forward to seeing you, and thanks so much for watching this video.